In a kingdom forgotten by modern maps but not by the gossiping tongues of history, a scandal unfolded that would make soap opera writers blush. It was the 15th century, a time when kings wielded more power than common sense, and nuns were supposed to have more devotion than distractions. In the kingdom of Valdebruma, things spiraled out of control when the king, a man with more crown than judgment, impregnated 6 nuns from the convent of Santa Perpetua. Yes, 6. And no, it wasn't a divine miracle. The 7th nun, however, had the good sense to flee with what would later be considered the only legitimate heir to the throne. This is the chronicle of a royal disaster, an epic escape, and a child who, unbeknownst to him, carried the weight of a kingdom in his diapers. Valdebruma was a picturesque place, straight out of a Renaissance painting. Green hills dotted with woolly sheep grazing under the watchful eyes of shepherds with gnarled staffs, crystal-clear rivers winding through weeping willows and silver poplars, and a castle that, though imposing, leaked on rainy days, forcing servants to place wooden buckets under the faded frescoes in the throne room. Built from gray stone quarried from nearby mountains, the castle dominated the valley from a steep hill, its crenelated towers seeming to touch the clouds, its drawbridge creaking like an old man's bones whenever its rusty chains were cranked. Ivy clung to parts of its walls, as if nature were trying to reclaim what men had built. In the inner courtyard, knights practiced with wooden swords, stable boys brushed restless horses, and washerwomen sang ballads while scrubbing sheets in soapy tubs. The villagers, living in wooden houses with thatched roofs and chimneys puffing gray smoke on cold mornings, regarded the castle with a mix of pride and resignation, knowing their fates hinged on decisions made in those damp halls where mold-scented tapestries, embroidered with hunting and battle scenes, hung. The king, Don Alfonso the Gallant, was a man of about 40, with a thick beard resembling a poorly groomed bird's nest and an excessive fondness for southern red wine, just where he let his favorite knights win to secure their loyalty, and apparently nocturnal visits to holy places. His nickname, the Gallant, once a compliment for his youthful knack for wooing court ladies with pilfered troubadour verses, now sounded more like mockery than praise, especially among tavern keepers who recounted his exploits with a wink and a chuckle. Alfonso wasn't a terrible ruler, at least not in the classic sense. His taxes were reasonable, though his collectors, men in tattered cloaks with scribbled ledgers, had a habit of rounding up in their favor, prompting hushed complaints in the markets. His wars were few, more due to a lack of funds than a genuine desire for peace, and his speeches, though long and filled with grandiose metaphors about soaring eagles and storm-defying oaks, usually lulled the court into a stupor, ensuring no one challenged his decisions, which were often dictated by his advisors while he nodded off on the throne. But one problem haunted him like a lengthening shadow at dusk. He had no heirs. His wife, Queen Dona Leonor, had died years earlier from a fever that neither the court's best physicians, with their herbal ointments and bleedings, nor their prayers could cure, leaving Alfonso childless and the kingdom without a clear future. The nobles, sensing instability like vultures circling carrion, began whispering about succession, each with their own candidate in mind, from distant cousins to ambitious nephews who already pictured themselves wearing the crown. In a kingdom where the crown was the glue binding its provinces, the lack of an heir was like building a ship without rudder or sails, doomed to crash on the rocks of ambition. The convent of Santa Perpetua, located on the outskirts of the capital in a valley ringed by hills where wolves howled on moonless nights, was a place of impeccable reputation, or so it was preached in the cathedral's Sunday sermons. The nuns, renowned for their exquisite embroidery adorning nearby church altars with scenes of the Virgin and saints, and for their lavender honey sold at a premium in the capital's markets, lived in near-total isolation. The convent was a gray stone stronghold, its walls so high they blocked even the songs of birds nesting in nearby oaks. Its weathered stones, worn by wind and rain, gave it the look of a medieval fortress more than a spiritual retreat. Inside, a meticulously tended garden held red and white roses, beds of medicinal herbs like mint and rosemary, and a small pond where fish swam in endless circles, oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. Gravel paths crunched under the nuns' measured steps, as if they feared disturbing the peace. The chapel, with stained glass windows casting multicolored mosaics on the polished stone floor, was the convent's heart, its Gregorian chants echoing like a perpetual prayer. The sisters were, in theory, a bastion of virtue in a world full of temptations, a beacon of piety guiding sinners to redemption. According to the bishop, a hollow-cheeked man who visited once a year to bless the crops and eat apple pie. But, as any seasoned tavern keeper would say, where there are humans, there are problems, and problems respect neither stone walls nor vows of chastity. The problem, in this case, arrived with a cloak, a sword, and a smile promising more than any decent man should offer. The first time Alfonso visited the convent, no one suspected anything, or at least, no one dared say so aloud. It was an official visit, announced with fanfares echoing through the valley like celestial trumpets and a retinue of knights in gleaming armor, leaving the courtyard littered with hoofprints and manure, much to the chagrin of the nuns tasked with cleaning. The king, with a wolf smile disguised as a lamb's, said he sought blessings for the kingdom, a phrase so vague it could mean anything from a prayer for good harvests to absolution for his tavern excesses. The Mother Superior, Sor Ana de los Dolores, a woman built like a centuries-old oak, her face etched with wrinkles like dry riverbeds, and the naivety of a dove who'd never seen a hawk, welcomed him with open arms and a bow that made her knees creak, a sound that echoed in the courtyard's stillness. She offered a tour, proudly pointing out tapestries the nuns had embroidered for the cathedral, each depicting saints who seemed to watch visitors with disapproval, as if sensing the king's unspiritual motives. She also showed him the scriptorium, a small room with wooden tables where sisters copied manuscripts with goose quills, their fingers ink-stained and faces focused under dim candlelight. Alfonso, who struggled to read beyond his advisor's letters and signed his name with a lightning-like scrawl, found the place bewildering but nodded with feigned enthusiasm, murmuring "marvelous" and "such dedication," while his eyes wandered to the younger nuns. In a gesture of generosity, Sor Ana gifted him a jar of lavender honey wrapped in a cloth embroidered with golden flowers, which Alfonso accepted with a nod and a promise to send a cart of wheat in thanks, a promise, like many of his, never kept. Alfonso, with a knack for trouble, saw the convent as more than a place of prayer, a place where no one watched him, where the court's ever-vigilant eyes couldn't reach, a refuge where he could be more man than king. And so, the visits became frequent, so frequent that villagers, seeing the royal retinue pass along dusty roads, noted the king spent more time at Santa Perpetua than in his leaky castle. At first, the nuns were delighted, or so they claimed during refectory chats over cabbage soup and stale bread. Not every day did a king take interest in their beeswax candles, molded carefully to burn without dripping, or their Gregorian chants, practiced until their throats begged for mercy. But Alfonso barely noticed the details. His tales, filled with anecdotes of tournaments where he always emerged victorious, though court knights knew he let favorites win, and hunts where boars became mythical beasts, were a breath of fresh air in the convent's routine, where days were split between morning prayers, garden or kitchen work, and long silences broken only by chants and the bell's toll. Among the sisters, 6 in particular seemed especially captivated by the king, as if his words were a magnet pulling them from the monotony of their vows. Sor Beatriz, Sor Ines, Sor Lucia, Sor Clara, Sor Margarita, and Sor Teresa were young, aged 18 to 25, and according to later rumors among washerwomen and stable boys, not entirely convinced that monastic life, with its dawn wake-ups and itchy wool habits, was their true calling. Sor Beatriz, the youngest, had a laugh like silver bells and a habit of forgetting silence rules during meals, earning stern glares from older nuns and extra rosaries as penance. Her hair, peeking in rebellious curls under her wimple, was the color of ripe wheat, and her rosy cheeks suggested she'd just run through a field, though she rarely left the convent. Sor Ines, with dreamy eyes and long lashes, spent more time gazing at clouds than praying in the chapel, her prayers sounding more like wishes than pleas. Sor Lucia, with chestnut hair escaping in messy strands under her wimple, was skilled at embroidering intricate flowers and birds, but also known for impertinent theology questions, like, why does God let rain ruin crops? Or, do angels cast shadows? Sor Clara, the most reserved, had a voice that could calm a spooked horse and a shyness that made her lower her gaze when spoken to, but her deep gray eyes held an insatiable curiosity for the world beyond the walls. Sor Margarita, robust with apple-red cheeks, tended the convent's beehives, her clothes carrying a faint scent of honey and wax that attracted bees even in the chapel, to others' dismay. Finally, Sor Teresa, the sweetest, had dark eyes that seemed to reflect candlelight and a smile that disarmed even the sternest nuns. Her kindness was such that she'd patiently chase escaped chickens back to the coop without complaint. Alfonso, with his charisma and tales of battles, exaggerated to where a wounded boar became a fire-breathing dragon, was like a troubadour who'd forgotten his lute but not his charm. The 6 nuns, who'd seen little beyond the convent walls except on rare market trips to sell honey, listened enraptured to his stories of distant courts where ladies danced under crystal chandeliers, feasts with roasted peacocks on silver platters, and silk dresses gleaming like the sun. Alfonso, no saint pretending to be one, noticed their interest as swiftly as a hawk spots prey. Instead of keeping his distance, as a wiser or less wine-soaked man might, he leaned into it. He didn't intend to cause a scandal, or so he'd later claim to his advisors, but men like Alfonso justify their mistakes as easily as they make them, as if the crown granted permission to ignore consequences. Things escalated one summer night when Alfonso, after drinking more wine than advisable for decision-making, sneaked into the convent. How he did it remains a matter of speculation among later chroniclers, who reconstructed the tale with more imagination than evidence. Some say he bribed a guard with a pouch of copper coins and a bottle of herbal liqueur from an eastern trip. Others, that he scaled a wall with cat-like agility, though his paunch and heavy ceremonial armor make that as likely as a pig flying over the castle towers. The most plausible theory, whispered by washerwomen who knew the convent's secrets better than the nuns, is that a servant, Pedro, a lanky youth dreaming of knighthood and a cape with the royal crest, helped him enter for a vague promise of promotion. Pedro opened a back door used for firewood deliveries, glancing nervously as if expecting an avenging angel. That night, Alfonso didn't leave until dawn, leaving behind sighs, stifled laughter, and the start of a problem no one could fathom. The clandestine visits continued for months, each riskier than the last, as if Alfonso were playing a game whose rules he didn't fully grasp. He arrived disguised as a pilgrim, in a stable-scented cloak and a wide-brimmed hat covering half his face, though his booming laugh and regal stride betrayed him to anyone who'd seen him in a royal parade. The nuns, initially startled to see him in the garden or dimly lit corridors, grew accustomed to his appearances, as if a king sneaking into a convent were as normal as roosters crowing at dawn. Sor Beatriz, always first to laugh, teased his disguise, saying he looked more like a turnip merchant than a pilgrim. Sor Ines, shyly, offered well water as if he were a common traveler. Sor Lucia, bolder, asked about court fashions, especially ladies' dresses, her fingers toying with her wimple's edge. Sor Clara, Sor Margarita, and Sor Teresa listened silently, cheeks flushing when Alfonso smiled at them. Nights filled with chatter, laughter, and eventually more than words. Furtive encounters in the barn, candle storeroom, or garden under rose bushes that kept secrets better than the nuns. By day, the convent was a model of order, with strict schedules and punctual prayers. By night, it became a stage for secrets, as if darkness brought a freedom daylight denied. The scandal broke when Sor Beatriz began showing unmistakable signs of pregnancy. Her habit, once loose like a sack, tightened suspiciously around her waist, and her morning sickness, initially blamed on too much cabbage soup or vigil candles, fooled no one, especially the older nuns with hawk-like eyes for rule-breaking. Her nausea was so frequent that during lauds, she fled the chapel, leaving a murmur louder than the hymn. The other nuns, neither blind nor as naive as their vows suggested, began whispering, first quietly during meals, then boldly in dark corridors where shadows hid their faces. Rumors spread like valley fog, reaching the washerwomen who visited weekly, women with tongues sharper than their needles, who carried the tale to the market, where fishmongers and cloth sellers embellished it with details that would make a sailor blush. Sor Anna, who dismissed the rumors as washerwomen's idle chatter, couldn't ignore the evidence when Sor Gertrudis, a sour-faced nun with an elephant's memory, noted that Sor Beatriz had requested extra thread to adjust her habit, something no nun did unless unusually plump. Sor Anna, whose patience was legendary and whose faith had survived plagues, famines, and a 1423 barn fire, summoned the nuns to the chapel, where stained-glass martyrs seemed to judge more harshly than any sermon. The meeting, held at dusk when the sun painted the walls red and gold, foreshadowed the drama. Standing before the altar, her wooden rosary dangling, her face paler than usual, Sor Anna asked any sister with a burden on her soul to step forward. The silence was suffocating. Then Sor Beatriz, eyes down, hands trembling, stepped forward, followed, one, by Sor Ines, Sor Lucia, Sor Clara, Sor Margarita, and Sor Teresa. What followed was a collective confession that would have shocked a seasoned cardinal. Each nun, with halting voice and tears like rain, admitted the king had been more than a spiritual visitor, a euphemism that fooled no one. Sor Beatriz spoke of promises of life beyond the convent, Sor Ines of curiosity gone too far, Sor Lucia of a silk dress that never arrived. Sor Clara and Sor Margarita said little, their silences louder than words. Sor Teresa, last to speak, simply said she'd believed in love, prompting a collective sigh, half pity, half disbelief. Sor Anna nearly fainted. Her face, usually serene as a still pond, turned waxen. But like a true leader, she held her composure, though her hands shook, gripping the rosary until the beads left marks. She ordered the 6 to their cells to pray until further notice, a penance sounding more like punishment than redemption. Alone at her scarred, ink-stained oak desk, she wrote a letter to the bishop, so vague it read like a theological treatise rather than a cry for help, mentioning a delicate matter and the need for divine guidance, avoiding naming the king, as accusing Alfonso was like asking a dragon not to breathe fire, futile and likely to get you burned, excommunicated, or locked in a tower. Sor Anna held a private council with the older nuns, excluding the culprits, who spent the night kneeling in their cells, praying amid sobs as candle shadows danced on stone walls. Sor Anna's plan was simple, if heart-wrenching, reflecting a woman who'd learned to prioritize the convent's survival over individual feelings. The pregnant nuns would be sent to a remote convent in Sierra Fria, so isolated even ravens avoided it, a crumbling stone building where wind whistled through cracks and nuns lived on rye bread and nettle soup. They'd give birth in secret, aided by a midwife who'd ask no questions for a few coins, and the babies would be given to peasant families in distant villages, families too hungry to question origins. The nuns, once recovered, would return or be transferred elsewhere, depending on the bishop, a man more interested in his reliquary collection than nun troubles. It was a practical plan, like pruning dead rose branches without looking back. But plans, like sandcastles, crumble under the first wave, and this wave was named Sor Isabel. Sor Isabel was unlike the other nuns in both appearance and character. At 30, she was almost venerable by convent standards, with a sharp gaze that cut through lies like a dagger through butter. Her angular, pale face wasn't classically beautiful but had an intensity that hushed conversations. Her coal-black hair, hidden under her wimple, and her calloused hands, more peasant than prayerful, hinted at her past. She'd joined the convent not by vocation but because her family, ruined by debts after a failed merchant ship investment, had no other option. Isabel, who in another life might have been a military strategist, cunning trader, or even a highwayman skilled in disguise, accepted her fate with the resignation of one who knows fighting the wind is futile. But she never stopped observing, listening, mentally noting every detail, as if weaving an invisible tapestry of information. In the convent, where most sisters settled into routine, Isabel was an anomaly. She read scriptorium manuscripts not just to copy but to understand, memorizing scripture and philosophy. She chatted with washerwomen, who knew village gossip better than any spy, to learn of court and noble rumors, and when the king's visits began, she noticed the 6 younger nuns returning from encounters with a mix of guilt and excitement her keen eye couldn't miss. When Isabel learned the 6 were pregnant, she didn't gossip like the others, who saw the scandal as guilt-free chatter. Hidden behind a chapel pillar during their confessions, her heart pounded so loudly she feared discovery. Then, with a hunter's patience, she gathered information, moving through the convent like a ghost. She spoke to the affected nuns individually, under the guise of offering spiritual comfort, bringing soup or damp cloths for feverish brows. Sor Beatriz, weeping, confessed she believed the king would take her to court, a fantasy Alfonso fed with empty promises. Sor Ines, more pragmatic but remorseful, admitted following him out of curiosity for the world in his tales. Sor Lucia, sighing heavily, said Alfonso promised a gold-threaded silk dress that never materialized. Sor Clara and Sor Margarita said little, their silences confessing enough. But Sor Teresa gave Isabel the key piece of the puzzle. Sor Teresa was different, not just for her disarming sweetness but for an unshakable faith that seemed to glow within. Her dark, expressive eyes reflected candlelight like mirrors, and her soft but firm voice calmed even clucking hens. During one of Alfonso's visits, under a full moon bathing the garden in silver, the king, in a rare moment of sincerity, or perhaps drunkenness, after sharing wine with a guard who later dozed off, swore that if she bore a son, he'd recognize him as his heir. It was a reckless promise, typical of a man who spoke before thinking, but Teresa, with her pure heart and faith in men as much as in God, took it as a sacred oath, sealed by Alfonso's candlelit gaze. When Isabel learned this, during a tearful talk in Teresa's cell where the young nun clutched a worn rosary, she realized Teresa's child wasn't just a baby but a pivotal piece in Valdebruma's future, a pawn in a chess game where nobles, advisors, and Alfonso played with the kingdom's fate. Isabel, knowing King's promises were as worthless as a leaking sack of grain, grasped the implications. If Alfonso kept his word, Teresa's son would be the legitimate heir, potentially stabilizing the kingdom but also sparking intrigue, as nobles with their own throne candidates, distant cousins or convenient bastards, wouldn't let a recognized bastard interfere. Alfonso's advisors, like Don Gonzalo de las Penas, an old man with a parchment face and undying ambition, or Don Ramiro de Valverde, younger but with serpentine eyes, whispered that a nun's child would stain Alfonso's legacy, a gift to rival courts mocking his lack of control. Alfonso, initially thrilled at the prospect of an heir to inherit his crown and perhaps his love of justice, wavered when advisors highlighted political fallout. One night in the council chamber, as candles burned low and wine stained the tablecloths, Don Gonzalo warned, "Majesty, a nun's son won't be accepted by noble houses. It's like throwing kindling on a northern forest fire." Alfonso, not prone to introspection, nodded, his face shadowed by doubt, and gave vague orders to avoid complications. Sor Anna's plan, under pressure from the bishop's emissaries and royal advisors visiting in dark cloaks, included an unspoken clause Isabel uncovered by eavesdropping. Pretending to sweep a corridor near Sor Anna's office, she overheard a knight sent by Don Gonzalo speak of resolving the nun problem and tying up loose ends. The words were cryptic, but the tone unmistakable. Alfonso's children, especially Teresa's, wouldn't survive. The idea of an innocent child, blameless of parental errors or noble ambitions, being sacrificed for political convenience was more than Isabel could bear. Her sense of justice, forged in her family's years of poverty and humiliation, flared like a torch. She resolved to prevent it, even at the cost of her life, freedom, or the precarious shelter the convent's cold walls provided. Escaping a convent wasn't like buying bread or picking herbs. The walls were high, topped with moss and vines hiding their sturdiness. The main gates were guarded by men who, though sometimes distracted by dice or cider, had strict orders. Narrow, iron-barred windows were more decorative than functional, and the only external access, a back door for firewood, was locked with an ancient padlock. The nuns, though pious and sometimes clever, weren't escape experts. Most hadn't left since taking vows, and those who recalled the outside world saw it as a place of bandits and storms. Isabel needed a plan, and fast, as Teresa's 7th-month pregnancy was increasingly visible, and Sor Anna, pressed by the bishop's men, had hastened preparations to send the nuns to Sierra Fria after the feast of Santa Perpetua, a yearly celebration of chants, a modest banquet of bread, cheese, and dried fruit, and villagers bringing offerings like chickens or homemade candles. Isabel, with her sharp mind, saw the feast, which would distract guards and nuns, as the perfect moment to act. First, she had to convince Teresa her son was in danger, a harder task than expected. Teresa's unwavering faith in Alfonso's goodness made it unthinkable that the man who'd sworn love under the moon would harm their child. 4 days, in whispered talks in the library or staged laundry encounters, Isabel reasoned with her, explaining that nobles saw the child as a threat and Alfonso, weak before his advisors, wouldn't protect him. Teresa, tears in her eyes, hands on her belly, resisted, insisting, Alfonso promised he wouldn't lie. But Isabel, knowing Teresa's innocence was as dangerous as a blade without a hilt, persisted. One night, while helping fold sheets in the laundry, she showed Teresa a stolen letter from Sor Anna's desk, snatched during a moment when the Mother Superior was distracted by an emissary. Written in Don Ramiro's elegant but cold hand, it spoke of resolving the nun problem and avoiding future complications for the crown. The words, though vague, were a dagger. Teresa, hearing them read in Isabel's hushed voice, paled, her rosy cheeks draining. With a slow nod, she gripped Isabel's hand, nails leaving crescent marks. "Save us," she whispered, giving Isabel the confirmation she needed. With Teresa convinced, Isabel recruited an unlikely ally, Diego, the convent gardener, a man straight out of a peasant ballad. Diego, about 50, with a limp earning him the ironic nickname, One Eye, despite his clear, squinting eyes, had a face weathered like a forgotten map and short, gray hair dusted with earth. His ambitions were modest, tending his carrot and onion patch, drinking cider at the village tavern on Saturdays, and avoiding trouble. But he owed Isabel a debt heavier than his fear of consequences. Years ago, accused of stealing convent apples, a crime warranting lashes or expulsion, Isabel, then a novice with a quick tongue, defended him to Sor Anna, claiming the apples had fallen and Diego merely saved them from rot. The lie, told with such conviction that even Diego, who'd eaten one, half believed it, spared him ruin. Since then, Diego viewed Isabel with respect and wariness, sensing she could move mountains or land him in inescapable trouble. Isabel's plan was risky but simple, like a well-aimed arrow. During the feast, when guards would be distracted by bread, cheese, and cider, and nuns busy chanting, she and Teresa would escape through a tunnel Diego found while digging for a new rosebush Sor Anna requested for the saint's honor. Legend, whispered by nuns on stormy nights, claimed the tunnel was built centuries ago during a war to hide convent treasures, gold chalices, saintly relics, illuminated manuscripts, from invaders. Whether true or not, Diego, ever curious, found its entrance under a mossy stone slab in a garden corner near the smelly chicken coop. The tunnel was narrow, damp, and reeked of forgotten earth, with crumbling clay walls and a low ceiling forcing even short Isabel to stoop. Crucially, it led to a nearby forest of pines and oaks, 500 paces from the walls, where wolves howled but a cart could pass unnoticed if careful. Diego would prepare a creaky but functional cart, hidden under pine branches in the forest, with provisions: stale bread the nuns discarded, pungent cheese, and a water skin filled from the convent well, its earthy taste attributed to the saint's blessing. The cart would be pulled by Estrella, an old brown mare who stopped to graze every few steps but was Diego's best option without raising suspicion. The goal was Puerto Claro, a port city 3 days away by backroads, where Isabel's distant cousin, Mateo, a carpenter, would help them vanish. Mateo, per old letters, was trustworthy, with a wife baking the city's best bread and a workshop crafting furniture for rich merchants, giving him contacts for forged papers or ship passage if needed. The feast night arrived, the convent buzzing with rare energy. Nuns sang hymns in the chapel, their voices rising like a river to the sky, backed by a wooden organ played with clumsy but eager fingers. Guards sat in the courtyard, drinking cider from clay jugs and laughing at a juglar's tales, a skinny man with a tuneless lute singing of dragons with more zeal than skill. Villagers, in their best faded wool tunics and patched cloaks, brought baskets of apples, flour sacks, and Cibo-scented candles. Diego, who'd spent the day pretending to garden while hiding the cart, awaited Isabel's signal, a candle lit in her cell's small garden-facing window. Isabel and Teresa, in stolen laundry cloaks smelling of lye and damp, slipped through corridors, avoiding areas where older nuns, too frail for long chants, prayed in their cells. The oil-lit hallways were nearly empty, save for a novice sweeping who nodded distractedly, assuming they were on a nighttime task. Isabel's heart pounded like a drum, but her face stayed calm, as if strolling the garden. Teresa trembled, gripping Isabel's hand, her pregnant belly slowing her steps under the cloak, her eyes fixed on Isabel like an anchor in a stormy sea. They reached the garden unseen, though a black cat on a mossy wall opened one eye, then closed it, as if nun escapes were routine. The slab covering the tunnel, hidden under wild herbs, was heavier than Diego's vague description. Isabel, silently cursing his imprecision, and Teresa, weakened by pregnancy, pushed together, ignoring shoulder pain and fear of the stone's groan waking someone. It shifted with a low rumble, revealing a dark hole like a monster's maw. Isabel, with an improvised torch of a stick wrapped in an olive oil-soaked rag stolen from the kitchen, descended first, checking for spiders, rats, or worse, alerted guards. The air was cool and damp, with a moldy smell clinging to the throat. Teresa followed, leaning on clay walls that left brown dust on her hands. The tunnel was claustrophobic, its root-covered walls brushing their shoulders, the low ceiling forcing Isabel to hunch. The uneven, slippery floor, littered with stones and puddles, soaked their woolen boots, making Teresa shiver. The earthy smell mixed with faint rot, as if something had died long ago. When Teresa tripped on a root, her stifled cry echoed like thunder. Isabel hissed for silence, her own heart racing. Raising the flickering torch every few steps, she checked for dead ends or collapses. The path felt endless, but after what seemed an eternity, likely half an hour, they saw faint light filtered through brambles at the exit. Isabel doused the torch, grinding it into the ground to hide smoke, and cautiously approached. Diego had partially cut the brambles, leaving just enough space to pass. Scratching her hands, Isabel cleared the way, letting in cool night air smelling of pine and damp earth. She helped Teresa climb out, supporting her heavy frame. Emerging into the forest under a starry sky, with the full moon silvering pine trunks, they breathed relief, though it was fleeting. Diego waited on the cart's bench, reins in hand, his face half relieved, half annoyed. "Thought you'd been caught," he grumbled, nodding at the cart. Estrella, nibbling grass, snorted as if agreeing. The cart, a creaky wooden frame covered with an old sheet, held the women on sacks smelling of stale grain. Diego clucked, urging Estrella forward. The forest was quiet, save for an owl's hoot and branches snapping under wheels. They traveled by night, following a faint trail, stopping at any sound, a wolf, bandit, or guard. By day, they hid in leaky barns, damp caves, or under a stone bridge where the river sang them to near sleep. Teresa, in her final pregnancy months, spoke little, clutching Isabel's hand. Diego, initially grumbling about cold, hunger, and Estrella's limp, grew fond of them, though he'd never admit it, sharing exaggerated tales of his youthful sailor dreams under starlit camps, making Teresa laugh and easing Isabel momentarily. Back at the convent, chaos reigned. Sor Anna noticed Isabel and Teresa's absence at dawn when Sor Gertrudis found their untouched beds. A thorough search, guards with torches checking the scriptorium's messy manuscripts to the indignant chicken coop, found nothing. The tunnel, covered by Diego's branches and moss, went unnoticed, though a young guard remarked the slab sounded odd, ignored amid laughter. Guards blamed the nuns, who blamed convent ghosts, a tale some believed, tied to a medieval nun, Sor Juana, said to haunt Santa Perpetua after dying of grief over a banned book. Sor Anna, skeptical of ghosts but not disciplined, interrogated the nuns in the refectory, her gaze piercing, but loyalty among sisters, though fragile, held stronger than fear. When news reached the castle, Alfonso panicked, a state his advisors, unused to seeing in a man who solved problems with wine and hunts, found alarming. He cared little for Teresa, barely recalling her among the nuns he'd charmed, but feared exposure as the king who'd turned a convent into a playground. Nobles, suspecting his lavender-scented cloak from market sightings, demanded answers, their council murmurs hinting at plots. Rumors spread like wildfire. The nuns were kidnapped by rival-paid bandits, ascended in a fiery chariot, or claimed by the devil, tired of losing souls to Santa Perpetua. Alfonso, pressed by nobles sensing weakness, sent soldiers led by Don Emilio, a young captain dreaming of medals but skilled only in parades. The soldiers, better at marching than tracking, returned empty-handed, blaming muddy boots and claiming the nuns fled to a distant kingdom, a theory Alfonso accepted to avoid further scrutiny. Isabel, Teresa, and Diego reached Puerto Claro, a bustling port where salt, fresh fish, and wet wood scented the air. Cobbled streets, slick from recent rain, echoed with merchants hawking spices, sailors singing bawdy songs, and barefoot children stealing apples. The harbor was organized chaos, with ragged-sailed ships, drying nets, and circling gulls. Mateo, Isabel's cousin, welcomed them into his two-story home overlooking the port, its red-tiled roof gleaming. A jovial carpenter of 45, his trimmed beard hiding a double chin, Mateo crafted furniture for wealthy merchants and had contacts aplenty. Asking only, "What mess are you in, cousin?" he gave them a modest adobe house with a thatched roof and a lemon tree perfuming the courtyard. Forged papers, penned on yellowed parchment by a friend, named them widows of a shipwrecked merchant, a story Puerto Claro's secret-laden residents didn't question. A month later, Teresa gave birth during a Gothic storm, with howling winds, lightning like divine notes, and rain battering the lemon tree house's windows. Isabel, aided by Mateo's hired midwife, a stout woman with steady hands and a bag of herbs, held Teresa's hand through screams of pain and fear. The midwife, ignoring the absent husband and their nervous door glances, worked efficiently, muttering prayers. The boy, healthy with Teresa's dark eyes and raven-black hair, was born as the storm eased. Named Martin, a common name to avoid suspicion, he prompted Isabel's dark jest of Alfonso II, earning a weak laugh from exhausted Teresa. Diego, waiting in the rain-soaked courtyard, wept seeing the child, later blaming rain in his eye and odd sneezes. In Puerto Claro, life was calmer than the convent but precarious, like a ship in fair winds with storm clouds looming. Isabel sewed ship sails and simple dresses, earning copper coins and faint praise. Teresa, recovering, raised Martin, who grew strong and curious, asking why the sea was sky blue or waves glowed under the moon. Diego, a grumbling adoptive grandfather, tended the courtyard garden and taught Martin to carve wooden ships and fish, treasures the boy cherished. The lemon tree house filled with laughter, fresh bread, and soup, a fragile calm after a tempest, though Isabel's vigilant eyes knew secrets, like adobe cracks, eventually show. In Valdebruma, rumors of the lost heir smoldered like embers. Tavern bets wagered he lived with wolves or was spirited to a far kingdom by witches. At court, nobles plotted, each eyeing the throne, as Alfonso, prematurely aged, his once lively eyes dulled, became a pawn. His advisors, sensing weakness, groomed successors, while the nun scandal became juglar songs, amusing villagers and shaming clerics. 15 years later, a tall young man with dark eyes and disarming calm arrived in Valdebruma, calling himself Martin the Traveler, a cloth merchant from southern ports. Rumors bloomed. His face echoed Queen Leonore's dusty throne room portrait, and his calloused hands held noble grace. Raised by Isabel and Teresa, Martin knew his origins but sought no crown, only curious to see where his mother suffered. But fate, crueler than a court jester, had other plans. Don Rodrigo de los Torres, an ambitious noble with a knife-sharp face, spotted Martin at a spice market. Seeing not an heir but a pawn, Rodrigo invited him to his stone fortress under the guise of a cloth deal, plotting to destabilize Alfonso and rivals. What followed was a web of intrigue, betrayal, and politics that would daunt any chronicler, with Martin, despite his anonymity, at the storm's center. Whether Martin claimed the throne or returned to Puerto Claro's lemon tree and singing waves is another tale, sung by Valdebruma's bards with growing embellishments, as if truth needed adornment. But the scandal reshaped the kingdom. Alfonso died heirless, his name a byword for folly, a cautionary tale mothers told children about ambition and wine. Santa Perpetua's nuns scattered to other convents, the building a vine-choked ruin where travelers heard ghostly laughs and cries under full moons. The cathedral's tapestries rotted in storage, and lavender honey lost its fame, as if betrayal tainted its sweetness. Isabel, Teresa, and Diego lived out their days in Puerto Claro, under the lemon tree bearing fruit through harsh winters, its lemons like small suns. Martin, king or not, never forgot the women who risked all for him. nor the gardener whose rickety cart, lazy horse, and big heart saved a kingdom, or at least a mother and son. Though Valdebruma's histories skip this tale, favoring sword-won battles and inked treaties, grandmothers by winter fires recounted with sly smiles and winks, knowing truth, like a fugitive nun in the night, always finds a way to escape, shine in the dark, and leave a mark no time or king can erase.